All right, so get ready for a deep dive today, folks, because we're tackling a chapter that really kind of grapples with how we understand the world. It's all about representation, this idea of intentionality, and believe it or not, it even throws in some Plato for good measure.
It's a fascinating philosophical journey, that's for sure. It really makes you think.
Yeah, and we're diving into sections 10.1 through 10.7 of this philosophy book we've been exploring. And it kicks off by asking what seems like a simple question. How do things represent other things? We all know that, words represent concepts, but it's definitely way more complex than just a simple resemblance.
Absolutely, yeah. The book actually uses this great example. Imagine a cloud formation that looks exactly like the Taj Mahal.
Okay, I can picture it.
So just because it looks like it, does that mean that that cloud is actually representing the Taj Mahal?
Right, right. Just because it looks like something doesn't.
It's a question of.
Yeah. My dog could arrange his toys in a way that vaguely looks like the Mona Lisa, but I highly doubt he's like making any profound artistic statement.
Exactly. There's something more to representation than just simple similarity. And that's where this idea of intentionality comes into play.
Okay, intentionality. Yeah, I've heard of it.
It's all about the aboutness of our thoughts, how our minds can be directed towards specific things.
Oh, I see what you mean. Is like how my thoughts can be about something specific.
Exactly.
Like my thoughts have this like invisible tether connecting them to the actual thing I'm thinking about.
Yeah, yeah.
But like how does that even work? It's kind of mind-boggling.
It's really wild, and the book actually dives into some pretty heady territory, using an analogy from particle physics to try and answer that very question.
Okay, now you've got to be kidding me. Particle physics to explain how our thoughts work.
I know it sounds a bit out there, but it's a fascinating analogy.
Lay it on me.
Believe it or not, the book uses gluon theory as a way to try to understand this idea of intentionality.
Wait, hold on. Gluons. Like those
Mhm.
tiny particles that hold quarks together?
You got it.
What do gluons have to do with our thoughts?
Okay, so I know it seems like a stretch, and it definitely is an analogy, but bear with me on this one. To sort of understand this gluon connection, the book takes us on a little trip back to ancient Greece.
Oh, okay. A little time travel to spice things up.
Exactly. We're going back to revisit Plato's theory of perception from his dialogue, the Theaetetus.
I'm always up for some Plato. What does Plato have to say about how we connect with the world?
All right, so in the Theaetetus, Plato says that when we perceive something, two things kind of come into being at the same time.
Okay, two things. What are they?
So first, you have the perception itself, right? And second, the actual thing that's being perceived. He describes them almost like twins born at the same moment. And importantly, these twins are inextricably linked.
Okay, I think I'm following you. So let's say I'm looking at a tree right now.
Perfect example.
So there's me, the perceiver, and I'm having this visual experience of a tree outside my window.
And at the same time, there's this tree perceived, this object of your perception that, as Plato might say, is kind of like the twin of your actual act of seeing the tree.
So we're talking about how our minds, in a way, create representations of the world around us,
Mm.
and how those representations are tied to the actual physical things that they represent.
Yes.
But where do the gluons fit into all of this? I'm still a little lost on the gluons.
That is the million-dollar question, and it's where things get really interesting. The book takes this idea of Plato's twin offspring, the perception and the thing perceived,
Okay.
and it uses it to explain intentionality through what it calls an I couple.
An I couple. Interesting.
Yeah, so this I couple joins together the perceiver and the thing perceived, those twins we were just talking about.
I'm with you.
And guess what acts as the glue holding them together?
It's got to be the gluons, right?
Got gluons.
Okay, hold on a second. I need a bit more explanation on this one. Are we saying that there are literal gluons, like those subatomic particles bouncing around in our brains, creating these connections? I mean, it's a cool image, but it doesn't seem quite right.
Not quite. It's not about literal gluons in our brains. I mean, can you imagine? Think of it more as an analogy.
Oh.
The book uses gluons as a metaphor, to represent this binding force of intentionality, just like gluons bind quarks together in the realm of particle physics. This metaphorical glue kind of connects our mental states to the objects of our perception.
Okay, so it's more about this concept of like an invisible link, a force that ties our thoughts to the things they're actually about.
Exactly. And it tries to get at this deep connection between our inner world of thoughts and the external world that we experience. But here's where things get even more interesting. This book, it doesn't shy away from the weird stuff, like what happens when our perception isn't quite accurate, or when it gets a little off.
You mean like when I'm convinced I see my cat out of the corner of my eye, but it turns out to be like a stack of laundry?
Well, that's a great example. But the book takes it even further, diving into more extreme cases. Things like hallucinations. What happens when someone perceives something that's not actually there in the real world?
That's a really good point. That definitely throws a wrench into this whole I couple idea, right?
Exactly.
Because, like, if I'm seeing a talking unicorn, but unicorns don't exist, what is my mind actually connecting to? It's
Right.
like, is my brain creating a non-existent unicorn just to, like, complete the I couple?
It's a mind-bending concept, and that's exactly what the book suggests. It makes this bold claim that in those cases, we're actually perceiving non-existent objects.
Whoa, hold on. You're telling me that my brain might be creating, like, unicorn-shaped objects even if unicorns don't exist?
It's a possibility the book raises.
That's both fascinating and a little terrifying.
It really is, and it challenges our whole understanding of what's real and what's not. The book argues that even these non-existent objects, like your talking unicorn, they can still be part of these I couples. They can still influence how we understand the world, even if that understanding is a little unconventional.
So it's not that the perception itself is false, but rather that we're genuinely perceiving something that doesn't have a real-world counterpart, at least not in the way we typically think about it.
Exactly. And it makes you question just how much of our reality is actually shaped by these internal representations. But if intentionality is all about this mental representation, what about other forms of representation? Like, how does language fit into all of this?
That's a great question. I mean, we talk about words representing things all the time.
All the time, yeah.
Like, the word tree represents an actual physical tree outside my window.
Exactly right.
But those are just words.
Right, and the book argues that these other forms of representation, like words, they depend on this underlying layer of mental intentionality. So the word tree only represents an actual tree because it's connected to those mental representations we've been talking about, those ones glued to the world through our perceptions.
Okay, so our shared understanding of the word tree depends on each of us having these individual mental representations of trees, which are then linked to actual trees through those I couple gluons.
That's the idea.
Like this whole chain of representation.
Exactly. It's like a chain reaction,
Mm.
starting with individual perception and rippling outward. Think about the word London, for instance. What pops into your head when you hear that word?
London. Um, well, I picture Big Ben, those red double-decker buses, maybe even a glimpse of the Queen waving from Buckingham Palace.
There you go. But those images, those are just your own personal mental representations of London. The word itself represents something much bigger, right?
Right, of course.
It represents this broader shared understanding of that city. And that shared understanding is built on a foundation of, well, countless individual mental representations, all sort of linked together through these metaphorical gluons.
So language is like this giant web of intentionality, all woven together by these individual gluon bonded thoughts.
You got it. And it's through this network, this incredible web, that we communicate, we share ideas, and we build upon each other's understanding of the world. What I find so fascinating is that this entire system, this intricate dance of language and meaning, it rests on this foundation of mental intentionality, which the book tries to explain through these I couples and this mysterious force of gluons.
Wow, okay. My mind is officially blown. This whole idea of gluons as the glue of intentionality is incredibly thought-provoking. It makes you realize how much we take for granted in our everyday experience of the world. It really is. It's like our whole understanding of reality is built on this, invisible network of connections that we rarely even stop to think about.
Right. And that's what I find so fascinating about this whole concept of, gluons as the glue of intentionality. It just highlights how much we just assume is stable and straightforward in our understanding of the world, when in reality, there are all these, like, really complex processes taking place behind the scenes.
It really makes you think, though. I mean, if these metaphorical gluons are what hold our mental representations together, what happens when those bonds are disrupted somehow? What happens when they become unreliable?
That is such an interesting question. And it makes you think about those instances, right, where our perception of reality is distorted, like in cases of, well, schizophrenia or dementia, for example. In those situations, it's possible that the ways in which we connect our thoughts to the world are being affected in really fundamental ways.
Yeah, it's almost as if the glue itself can become unstuck, which makes our understanding of the world much more fragile than we often realize.
It really does. And it highlights how crucial those connections are for us to function, the connections between our inner experiences and the external world. I mean, even something as simple as like a really convincing optical illusion can show us how easily our brains can be tricked, how our perception can be skewed.
It really is a humbling thought, to realize that our understanding of the world, even something as basic as perception, is based on these like really intricate and sometimes delicate processes that we're really only just beginning to understand.
It really is. It just reminds us that there's still so much that we don't know about the nature of consciousness, about representation, about what it really means to perceive the world around us. It's a really exciting field to be thinking about.
It really is. Well, there you have it, everyone. We've spent this deep dive exploring how this book uses this really interesting analogy of gluons to explain how our minds create meaning by connecting our inner world of thoughts to that outer world of objects. We grappled with some pretty mind-bending implications of perceiving things that don't actually exist, and we even explored how language itself builds upon this foundation of individual gluon-bonded mental representations.
It's been a really fun journey, that's for sure. And, as with most deep dives into these kinds of topics, we're left with more questions than answers.
Which I think is a good thing. It means there's more to think about. But for now, it's something to ponder as you navigate the, shall we say, fascinating and sometimes perplexing landscape of your own existence.